Hi everyone and welcome. I'll just give people a couple of minutes to come in from the waiting room and then we'll get going. We're commissioning a piece of music at Community Land Scotland at the moment, so in the future we'll be able to play a lovely kind of musical interlude at the start of all of our webinars. But I can see people are starting to arrive now, so I think we'll just get going with the webinar. So today our webinar is on land rights and responsibilities, creating opportunities for ownership of land. I'm Lindsay Chalmers, I'm the Development Manager at Community Land Scotland. And we'll be hearing today from Kirsty Tate and Helen Barton from the Scottish Land Commission about land rights and responsibilities, and from our own Callum MacLeod about land rights and responsibility self-assessments. I'm just going to run you through a few housekeeping points before we get started. So the session is being recorded today, so if you don't want to note everything down as people are talking, it'll be going up on our Vimeo site afterwards, probably be up there in a couple of days from now. So you'll be able to view it and share it with other people. Can we ask that you ask any questions in the Q&A function? We'll have a short Q&A section at the end of each presentation, and then we'll have a longer Q&A session and time for discussion at the very end of the webinar. So just for a few points about Community Land Scotland, in case you don't know us as an organisation. We're the representative body for community landowners in Scotland. And our job is really to represent the views of community landowners and allow sharing from the work that they do to create a better society for Scotland. We do a lot of knowledge exchange work, so our 100 or so members do a vast range of different things, from housing through to spaceport development. We do a lot of awareness raising work, and we're also here to support communities throughout their journey, both in the run up to buyouts and post acquisition. So if you want to find out more about Community Land Scotland, I would encourage you to go onto our website where there's a lot of information about what we do. So I'm going to hand over now to the team at the Scottish Land Commission to give you their presentations. Thank you.
Kirsty, you're on mute.
Hello everyone, my name's Kirsty Tate and I'm the Good Advisor, Practice Advisor for the Scottish Land Commission, and I'll just quickly hand over to Helen to introduce herself.
Good morning everybody, I'm Helen Barton and I'm the other Good Practice Advisor at the Scottish Land Commission, and Kirsty and I will be dotting backwards and forwards between us for the next hour or so. Look forward to speaking to you all.
Okay, Helen, I'm going to hand over to you because my presentation is not showing on my screen at the moment, so I'm going to hand over to you, Helen, to do the introduction, and I'll work a bit with my notes.
Okay, thanks Kirsty. Kirsty, I can see it here. You just need to press from the beginning, I think, it's showing on my screen, so hopefully it'll be coming up for everybody. But what we'll be doing today, we'll be going through three sections in our presentation for you today. First of all, we'll be looking at all the protocols around land rights responsibilities that the Scottish Land Commission has produced over the last few months, and we've broken them down into three sections. So first of all, we'll be looking at how they work to help empower communities, looking at community engagement and transparency of ownership and use. Second part, we'll be looking specifically about how the protocols can help create opportunities for greater community ownership of land, looking in particular at good stewardship and the diversification of ownership and tenure, and at negotiated transfer of land to communities. And finally, we'll be looking at how the protocols pick out responsibilities for communities themselves. We'll pause for questions and answers at the end of each of those sessions, but we'll also have a longer question and answer session at the end. So as Lindsay was saying earlier, do pop your questions into the question and answer box as we're going along, but we will stop so people can come in and ask us things as we're going along as well.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, so I'll launch into the introduction. So who are we and what do we do? So some of you may have heard of the Scottish Land Commission, some of you may have not heard of a Scottish Land Commission. So we are a public body established on the 1st of April 2017 by the Land Reform Scotland Act 2016, and we're wholly funded by the Scottish Government. Our vision is for a fair and inclusive and productive system of ownership, management and use of land that delivers greater benefits for all people of Scotland. We do this by stimulating fresh thinking, supporting change on the ground, and making recommendations to Scottish ministers where appropriate for legislative and policy change. So just to clarify, I think this is a question we often get asked. When we talk about land, we mean all land in Scotland, both urban and rural, including watercourses, buildings, and structures on the land. So I'm just going to show you a quick video that will give you a brief overview of the Scottish Land Commission and our work. Apologies, my connection doesn't seem to be working very well. There we
go. Land matters because we all use it and we all need it. The way land is owned and used in Scotland affects housing, access to green space, the success of businesses, the health of communities, and our ability to take action against climate change. The list of demands on our land grows and evolves every day, and we need to work to share the benefits of Scotland's land more widely across our growing and changing population. Land is central to our economy, and by making better use of it, we can provide value to more of the people of Scotland. We need to consider property rights alongside our economic, social and cultural rights. In order to meet Scotland's ambitious climate targets, the way land is used will need to change. The principles of the Scottish Government's Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement give us a roadmap for making this transition fair and well managed. At the Scottish Land Commission, we are working to create a Scotland where land is owned and used in ways that are fair, responsible and productive. A Scotland where more people are able to shape and benefit from decisions about land. And a place where land use and land ownership create public value and economic well-being. We are working to achieve our goals by reforming land rights, changing the way land is owned and controlled to drive economic, social and environmental value, strengthen community resilience and reduce inequalities, reforming land markets, improving the efficiency and equity of land markets to support a fair and productive economy, and putting accountability and responsibility at the heart of land ownership and use. We are involving many different people and organisations in our work to hear diverse perspectives, perform our analysis, and gather the evidence that informs our advice and recommendations to Scottish ministers, Parliament, and stakeholders. We are leading the change in practices that help people and organisations fulfil the principles of the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement. We will also continue to deliver the Tenant Farming Commissioner's functions as part of our work. We are creating a Scotland where everyone benefits from the ownership, management and use of the nation's land.
So that gave you a brief overview of the wider work of the Scottish Land Commission, and today we're really going to focus on the work of the Good Practice team. That's Helen and I and our colleagues Emma and Gemma, and focus on the protocols that stem from the Scottish Land Rights and Responsibility Statement. So for those, it was mentioned in the video there, but for those who don't know, the Scottish Land Rights and Responsibility Statement published by the Scottish Government is the first of its kind anywhere in the world, and it sets out a vision for a strong and dynamic relationship between Scotland's land and its people. As we know, the decisions we make about land ownership, use and management are central to some of the key challenges we face. including social and economic inequality and the climate emergency. And also right now, I think we're all aware, our country's post-pandemic recovery and renewal. This is all about realising the rights of everyone in relation to land, not just property rights, and the responsibilities that come for all of us with these land rights. Land rights and responsibilities are about owning, managing and using land in a fair and just way that benefits everyone in Scotland. And realising and applying these can reduce inequality, bring mutual benefit to landowners, managers and communities alike. So the statement is made out of from 6 mutually supportive principles. And this underpins our work at the Commission, and very specifically the work that we do through the Good Practice Programme in implementing culture and practice change. These rights and responsibilities, as I said, apply to both urban and rural Scotland, and I'll just go through the key changes sought. So firstly, that the overall framework of land rights responsibilities should promote, fulfil and respect relevant human rights, contribute to public interest and well-being, and balance public and private interests. A big focus of today's workshop is about creating diversity in ownership of land, including more community ownership. High standards of stewardship of land should be exercised, as well as high standards and transparency of land ownership and use. And finally, better community engagement about decisions about land. So just briefly, who are we and what does the Good Practice team do? As you know, we have a key role to play in the development and realisation of the statement's principles. Our Good Practice programme has been designed to provide a visible and coordinated approach to encourage and enable those with interest in land to recognise and fulfil their rights and responsibilities in very practical ways. So this stuff can happen right now. We are working with the Good Practice Advisory Group to co-produce voluntary protocols, guidance, training and develop land rights and responsibilities self-assessments. So just to give you an overview of this group, it includes representatives from Community Land Scotland, Development Trust Association Scotland, National Farmers Union Scotland, Scottish Land and Estates, the Scottish Property Federation and Scottish Environment Link. So we've got a wide range of representation there. We also engage with and involve other organisations with particular experience and expertise to draw on. We offer an advice and casework service, which supports the implementation of the expectations you're about to hear. Where appropriate, we can and will provide advice and engage with the relevant parties on the ground to support resolution and improvements in practice. We'll discuss the land rights and responsibilities self-assessment in a minute and opportunities to get involved with these. So what are these voluntary protocols and why are they important? So the protocols set out what good practice looks like in a clear way. It sets out practical expectations for interested parties. They're being designed to enhance accountability by providing a feedback mechanism to ourselves, and it supports all relevant parties to take a fair and reasonable approach. Why do we think these protocols are important and why have we taken this approach? So the protocols set out specific expectations and they can be used to hold behaviour to account. The protocols are really helpful to the Commission because we can collate evidence of where further action may need to be taken to effect the change needed for our continued land reform journey. These protocols can be used by anyone in Scotland, but they're particularly useful for communities and landowners as they set out practical ways that they can realise their rights and responsibilities with regard to land in their locality. For landowners and managers, they set out what responsible practice looks like. So we believe that bringing these will bring benefits to all parties involved. They provide opportunity for genuine engagement and collaboration, which can reduce potential conflict. They can help to make all parties more resilient and increase the generation of new ideas and opportunities. So this is the full suite of our protocols to date. You'll see the ones not in italics. These are the ones that we're going to focus on today. So community engagement, transparency of ownership, good stewardship, diversification, and negotiate transfer of land to communities. We also have another 3, land ownership by charities and private trusts, and common good land, which is currently in draft, which some of you might be interested in. That will be published hopefully at the end of this year, and we'll be working with local authorities in a further programme of work looking at how we use common good land more effectively. So I'm going to hand over to Helen and Callum now, who've been leading on our land rights and responsibilities self-assessment work, just to give you a brief introduction.
Thanks, Kirsty. Sorry, my unmute button wasn't unmuting. Thanks, Kirsty. I'll just quickly introduce what the self-assessments are, and then Callum can come in and talk about the work that Community Land Scotland have been doing with us on this. We've been developing a framework along with our Good Practice Advisory Group to take all the protocols that we'll be talking to you about, to take the land rights and responsibilities principles and the expectations from the protocols, and really help landowners look at how their work, how they manage existing management and use of land helps to deliver the land rights and responsibilities principles. So we're working with all types of landowners, private landowners, environmental charities, public sector organisations, but also community landowners to test a self-assessment framework that we've started to develop to just make sure that we've got a model that works, that's easy to use, that's not too onerous, but that's prompts enough to get people to think, to reflect a bit and think about how they're doing and how their practices might change. Once we've got a template that works properly, we would hope that we'll roll this out, and this is something that can be widely available for any landowners that want to use it. So this work we'll be evaluating this around the spring next year to try and get something that's available for anybody to pick up and use as they need it. So the work we're doing with partner organisations, including Community Land Scotland, is looking at the operation of this in different sectors and with different types of organisations, and to get feedback on how useful people find the process and what changes might need to be taken. The self-assessment framework as well will also provide feedback to us as the Scottish Land Commission, which will influence how our work around land rights and responsibilities is taken forward. The statement is due for review by the Scottish Government in 2022. And also it links into other work that we did over the last couple of years around the effects of scale and concentration of ownership of land, and there are a number of recommendations that came from that from that work, but one of the recommendations was to develop a statutory review process in particular circumstances, and the Scottish Government has agreed those recommendations and asked us to take that forward and to develop further proposals on that. So how far a voluntary process can work will definitely feed into that, so people who are joining in this pilot with us will shape and influence how that work gets taken forward as well. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to let Callum come in to talk a little bit about how we've been working with community landowners in particular to start to pilot this process.
Okay, this is a really timely webinar actually, because it illustrates I think the very positive collaborative relationship that Community Land Scotland has with Scottish Land Commission and other stakeholders as well, with regard to good practice in relation to land rights and responsibilities, and all that flows from that in terms of what Helen has just outlined. And Community Land Scotland, it will not surprise anyone to hear, is very much in favour of more diversified ownership and use of land, which actually serves the public interest and the common good. And so all of the work that Kirsty and Helen have just described is very much focused in relation to doing exactly that. And so we're very pleased to be a partner with regard to that, and also leading in terms of some of the wider questions too, in collaboration with the Commission and other stakeholders, in terms of how we actually address and make these issues work in practice.
Can I just interrupt you briefly, because I think people are having problems hearing.
My
Yes,
microphone may well be not as good as it should be in that case, so my apologies. Hopefully that's a wee bit better. So these are all really important issues from our perspective with regard to just making sure that land is owned and used in the public interest and for the common good. And so the land rights and responsibility statement is a really critical element of that. So we've been really pleased to work in partnership with the Land Commission with regard to piloting the land rights and responsibility self-assessment framework. And as Helen has said, this framework is very much with a view to enabling all types of landowners, and certainly from our perspective, community landowners, to actually reflect on and demonstrate ways in which they can actually implement the principles insofar as it's practicable for them to do so and relevant for them to do so in their own operations. And within that context, both myself and a colleague, Duncan McPherson, have been working with a group of, it's up to 12 community landowners to actually test the framework in practice. And what we've done there is very much look to have a diverse range of different landowners as well with regard to those that we're working with at this pilot phase. So we're looking at both rural and urban community landowners. We're looking at landowners that have work at different scales. So some of them have are owners of large estates. Some of them are owners of small plots of land and also buildings as well. So that diversity is really important. And I think it illustrates as well the fact that the statement is of relevance to all types of landowners in that context, but also of course interested as well in terms of ways in which we can capture the range and diversity of activities that landowners are actually engaged in, so that that can tie back into the framework itself. So this, as Helen has said, is very much a process where we are looking to enable and assist community landowners to, first of all, demonstrate all the fantastic, frankly, good work that they are doing in relation to addressing land rights and responsibilities, and also reflect as well on ways in which they might be able to capture that and improve on processes and activities in practice as well, so they can actually maximize their performance with regard to putting the statement into practice in terms of their self-assessment process. And as Helen has also said, this is very much with a view to making sure that the framework, when it actually comes into practice and is published formally by the Land Commission next year, is actually fit for purpose in terms of what community landowners, but also all types of landowners need to achieve and use in order to make it as effective as possible for them. And Helen as well, just to finish, also made a very important point in relation to the review of the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement, which, as we know, was part of the Land Reform Act 2016. It's going through a review process, or will go through a review process in 2022. That's a really important part of Scotland's land reform journey, because the statement itself provides Community Land Scotland argues a very important opportunity to reinforce and refresh ways in which land reform and land ownership and land use is actually used for the public benefit, for the public interest, and for the common good as well. And that's really important in terms of how we think about land as this fundamental resource that we all depend on and that we all need to use in ways that are equitable, fair, and deliver that socially just, greener and more prosperous Scotland that I think we're all collectively interested in. So that's really all I have to say on that, and hopefully you've managed to pick up at least some of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Callum. So an exciting process, an exciting time, and what we'll move on to now. So this workshop's really about looking at the protocols and what they can bring for you as communities. We do a lot of these workshops with landowners and look at how that affects their practice. But this one's quite interesting and exciting because it's actually looking at the protocols and what it can actually offer to communities, what they can expect from landowners, and what opportunities might be created by changing practice and culture for more community ownership. So the first part is about empowering communities. So it's looking at how decisions about land are taken and how communities are involved in that decision making, but also empowering communities in terms of the knowledge that they can have about lands to do with transparency. So I'm going to hand over to Helen now, who will go through these protocols and expectations, and we'll then stop for a bit of a question and answer session and then move on to the next section.
Thanks, Kirsty. I'm going to pick up with the first two of the protocols that we've talked about. And as Kirsty's explained, we're looking at these particularly from the perspective from community organisations and what you might expect from landowners. Some of you, I know, will be landowners as well. Some of you will own land-based assets, whether it's land or buildings. So you'll have two hats. You'll be thinking about this with two hats on, both as your responsibilities as landowners and land managers, but also in terms of your ongoing engagement with the communities that you're working with. But we'll be looking at it in particular from the perspective of communities themselves. So the first protocol supports, Kirsty mentioned there are 6 principles in the Land Rights Responsibilities Statement, and the first protocol we published around community engagement relates to the last one. We're kind of working through backwards with these, it's just the way they flow better. So principle 6 of the Land Rights Responsibilities Statement is that there should be greater collaboration and community engagement in decisions about land. So a nice, easy, simple statement. The protocol that we've developed to support this principle is the first one that we published. Probably getting on for two years ago now. It sets out how people who take decisions about land engage with the people that are affected by those decisions. And that's to enable better and fairer decisions about the land use to be made. It's supported as well by guidance that the Scottish Government published around about the same time as the Land Rights Responsibilities Statement. They published guidance on engaging communities in decisions relating to land, and our protocol very much draws from that and supports that guidance that's been published. It's available on the Scottish Government website, and there are links from our website as well. So, I mean, do have a look at that. It's still a really, really useful and practical document that I know a number of stakeholder organisations, including Community Land Scotland, are involved in the original drafting of. So it's a very user-friendly document. So why is this principle in the Land Rights Responsibility Statement? Why do we have a protocol about it? Well, the benefits of good community engagement help to build trust between communities and between landowners and land management and other people who have an interest in that land. It helps to build positive and cooperative working relationships and foster a mutual understanding of the issues involved, so that people aren't entrenched in positions and have a better understanding of different perspectives about the issues that can sometimes be quite challenging in coming to decisions about land use. We particularly hope it supports communities to express themselves and become involved in decisions that affect them, which in turn then can lead to more creative, more innovative, more place-based solutions being developed to issues. And fundamentally, that will all help to secure the better economic, environmental, social and cultural outcomes that all parties are needing in terms of the way the land resource, the limited land resource that we have in Scotland is put to best use. When we often get asked about what we mean by community, and when we're talking about communities, our focus is very much on communities of place. It's about the individuals who live and work in places, which can be in either urban or rural areas. So, I mean, that might include whole towns, it might be single streets, it could be a large geographic estate or a small village or neighbourhood. We're not prescriptive about it because it does very much depend on your local context, and it is flexible. We don't discount either communities of interest. There are times when it's really important and really essential for communities, the feedback from communities of interest to be taken into account. But we're particularly focused on the impact that decisions have on people who live in the place where those decisions are going to be put into effect. So in terms of the protocol, each of the protocol takes the principles, the high-level principles of the land rights responsibility statement, and sets out a list of expectations that we expect both landowners and managers and communities to be able to put into practice. So it's looking at what the principles actually mean in practice. So from a community perspective, what can you expect from this protocol? Well, the first is that you can reasonably expect to be engaged in any decisions about how land is going to be used or managed, or any particularly significant changes to that use of land that are going to impact on you as a community, as groups of individuals within a community. I'll come on to the supporting resources that we have, but I mean, we would expect different levels of engagement depending on the impact that decisions or land practices are going to have. The second is that engagement should be a genuine exercise, which may sound obvious, but I mean, feedback that we've had from some of our own research is that one of the things that frustrates community organisations, possibly more than not being engaged at all, is a sense that the engagement is very tokenistic, that decisions have already been made, or that they don't get feedback, they don't get to know how their views have been taken into account. So we do emphasise that the engagement should be a genuine conversation, a genuine two-way discussion, and that it's an open-ended exercise. I mean, obviously there will be instances where engagement takes place about something very specific that's happening over a particular time constrained period, and landowners and managers want feedback on that particular issue. But we would look for the engagement overall to be an ongoing exercise. It's a relationship. So we're looking for that engagement to be a permanent relationship where that dialogue and the channels of communication are open, apart from particular issues that are coming up, so that when those decisions on particular issues do need to come, then all parties already have those channels of communication, then already have some sort of dialogue and some sort of knowledge of each other there. The fourth sort of general headline expectation is that the engagement is proportionate. That it's proportionate to the resources that everybody has available, and that's obviously comes down to budgets and funding, but in particular it comes down to time. Everybody's busy with lots of different activities, so it has to be proportionate to the resources available, but in particular it has to be proportionate to the impact that decision is going to have on the community. So if, for example, a land manager's activities are general day-to-day management of the business, the engagement's probably going to be relatively low level. It's probably going to be more keeping people up to date with what's happening and keeping information channels open. But if there's going to be a significant change that's going to have a long-term or a permanent impact on communities, then obviously we would expect that engagement to be much more structured and to be much for resources to be built into the project planning to make sure that communities have a proper chance to receive information and have a say and feed their views and ask questions and feed their ideas into that. And final one there is that requests for information should be accommodated wherever they can be. There are some things that we wouldn't expect people to be sharing. We wouldn't expect people to be sharing personal information or highly commercially sensitive information, but where appropriate and proportionate, a community should be able to ask for information and for that request to be accommodated. So underneath those headlines, there are some specific expectations that are particularly relevant to communities. We would expect that a landowner or a land manager will be developing an engagement plan if they're going to be taking any decisions that are going to have a significant impact. And a community should be able to go and ask to for an engagement plan to be developed and to have some input into that as well, so that it's not just a one-way process. Information should be available, publicly available and easily available for people who want to access it, and also available at a stage where that decision can still be influenced, so that it's not just produced at the last minute when the options are relatively limited. So it's early enough that people from the community have the opportunity to find out more and to have an input into that. Any meetings that should be agreed in advance about how actions and decisions are going to be recorded and how that information is going to be made available afterwards. And most importantly, once a decision has been taken, we say in our protocol that the views from the community should be explained. So it's not just the engagement process, the feedback process is really important as well. And we set out recommended timescales on how communities find out what's happened to the input that they've had. Doesn't necessarily mean that all views from everybody in the community can always be taken into account and can always be taken up. We would hope that they would shape the collaborative process and they will shape the decisions that are being made. There may be some circumstances for genuine reasons where they can't be taken, but that should be explained, and it should be explained why and why that process has been taken. Okay, we'll move on to the next protocol, which is about transparency of ownership, and these two very much support each other, these two principles, and this is the fifth principle within the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, which is that there should be improved transparency of information about the ownership, use and management of land, and this should be publicly available, it should be clear and contain relevant details. So again, a very straightforward and a very useful and powerful principle within the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. The protocol we've developed to support this principle sets out the information that should be provided by landowners and managers to help improve transparency and understanding about who owns land in Scotland and also what it's being used for. This is important because it's been recognised that a lack of transparency about land ownership and land use decision making is a barrier to dialogue and a barrier to progress. Information about land and buildings provides the foundation for open and transparent decision making and can enable greater participation, which is also a key element of the human rights framework that frames all the land rights responsibilities principles. Improved information about who controls land in Scotland will help empower people and communities and give the opportunity to understand who's in control of land. Now, the Scottish Government has invited the Keeper of the Register, so that's not us, this is a different organisation, the Keeper of the Register to complete a land register by 2024. So in the next few years, over the next 3-4 years, landowners and managers will have to contribute to both a land register and also a new register of persons holding a controlled interest in land, which will lead to better quality and more accessible information about land for all of Scotland. And you can find out more about this by looking at the website for the Registers of Scotland, www.ros.gov.uk, which is a very accessible and easy to navigate staff site, and staff there are happy to help with inquiries. So given that legislative requirement is already there and is already being taken forward by Registers of Scotland, why has this protocol been developed now? Well, we've developed the protocol and we'll move on to the expectations. I think, Kirsty, thanks. We've developed this protocol because ahead of the establishment and completion of the registers, the protocol sets out again, reasonable expectations of information that can be provided now by those who own and manage land in Scotland without it being over onerous and without it duplicating the process that they're already having to go through for registration. So information about ownership, use and management should be available to people that could be impacted by decisions made about that land use and management. So our protocol sets out a template for people to provide that information about who owns land and buildings, the extent of land holdings, but also people or bodies with significant influence and control, providing information about who they are and the extent of control along with the information about that. We're looking for contact information for the landowner or somebody who has the decision-making authority on their behalf, such as a land manager or an agent, to be easily available. And for a land management plan, which might be a copy or it might be a summary, it depends on the complexity of that particular land management, to be easily available for people who need it. So to support landowners and managers to do this, we've actually created a template for them to use, which provides, it's very simple, it's a one-page document that sets out ways that they can provide this information about ownership and use, detailing who owns the land and their plans for it, and how communities can get in touch with them. And that's available on the Good Practice section on our website. So the supporting resources that we have on our website that we've developed to support both of these protocols include the templates for land ownership and management that I've just mentioned. There's also a route map which sets out more information. It develops from the protocol the types of methods and information that's expected of landowners and managers in different situations, depending on the impact that their land management is going to have on those communities of place. We've developed a very practical guide for owners and managers of land who want to develop an engagement plan with their communities, which communities can also pick up and use as well. We've got frequently asked questions there about community engagement, and we also have an information map about where communities can find out more about land ownership, but also an information map for landowners about where they can find out more about how to get in contact and how to have dialogue with communities if they're not already doing that. So we will pause there, I think, and we'll ask if anybody has any questions that they want to pick up at this stage.
Thanks, Helen. We have one question in. If anyone else wants to ask questions, they can do that in the Q&A box, but I'll just ask the first question. So does Scottish Land Commission agree that the ERA, assume that means Equality Rights Act, is needed for fairness and equality for communities? This is from Marie at Montanaro, and she's saying her experience as a community councillor is that the local development plan engagement is simply lip service, a tick box exercise. What's your view on that?
Yeah, if you haven't come across it yet, Marie, I mean, have a look at the guidance on community engagement that the Scottish Government has produced, because that sets out some very important principles. But if you haven't found it yet, have a look as well at the national standards for community engagement that were produced. They were produced by Scottish Government, but they're kind of managed by the SCDC, Scottish Community Development Council, I think. I'm losing track of my acronyms. So it's available there on their website. The national standards for community engagement have actually been around for quite a while, but set out some really important principles and also tools that can be used by anybody, any organisation that's making decisions, but really useful tools for communities there as well. And it does focus particularly on the issues of equalities and making sure that as many people in the community as need or want to have a say have that voice, and sets out practical steps that people need to be thinking about to make sure that any barriers to engagement are removed, and to make sure that that engagement is fair. So have a look at that, but also our protocol does provide a means for people to come to us if they think the expectations of the community engagement protocol aren't being upheld. You can come to us and explain why you think those principles aren't being upheld, and we can intervene to some extent. We can certainly have the protocols are voluntary protocols, but we can intervene and we can open up conversations and look to have dialogue with all parties and try and provide advice and support to help practices be improved. I don't know if you want to say anything more on that, Kirsty.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose our community engagement protocol, it is voluntary. It is pre-statutory, so it's non-statutory decisions, because we realise that there are processes in place already that which community engagement and standards are upheld. We know sometimes that isn't always the case. However, we have done quite a lot of research, some interesting research on very early engagement in the planning process. So do again, look at our website. There's some great case studies there. There's recommendations, and it is something that we'll be working with and working alongside others that are looking at the planning system and how we improve it. I'm looking forward to the implementation of local place plans, I think, and how what impact they potentially could have on the planning system in terms of communities having their voice. So lots going on, exciting progress, and yeah, just keep working with us. And if there is something specific that you're concerned about, do get in touch after this webinar, and as I say, we offer support, advice.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. I don't think we've got any more questions for now, so we'll move on to the next section.
So the next section, this is very much about creating opportunities for community ownership, and this very much feeds into Community Land Scotland's webinar workshop tomorrow, which looks at negotiated transfer and negotiated sale. And I see this as being the kind of first part of it. So it's trying to focus on working with landowners to create those opportunities so these negotiated sales can actually happen. So what I'm going to do is briefly go through the three protocols that connect to this. So the first looks at good stewardship of land. That's Land Rights and Responsibilities Principle 4. So again, we're not really going in any order here. And which states that the holders of land rights should exercise these rights in ways that take account of their responsibilities to meet high standards of land ownership, management and use. Acting as stewards of Scotland's land resource for future generations, they contribute to sustainable growth and a modern, successful country. So this protocol that stems from this principle promotes good stewardship and high standards of land across Scotland. We know that decisions that are made with a focus on good stewardship take into consideration the long-term needs of local communities and for public benefit in support of wider national outcomes. Through this protocol, we acknowledge that many people with an interest of land already make significant contributions to Scotland's economy. And there are many existing examples of really good practice in this area of decision making. It also confirms that owners, managers and users of land have an important role to play in shaping and guiding change in a way that delivers mutual benefits and secures our land for future generations. So we've provided supporting information which links much wider advice, support and guidance on this area, and a range of areas related to good stewardship which can help landowners take and implement decisions about land use and management. Moving on to the next two principles, these focus on diversification of ownership and tenure and negotiating transfer of land to communities. So the two principles that deal with this is Principle 2, which states there should be a more diversified pattern of land ownership and tenure with more opportunities for citizens to own, lease and have access to land. And Principle 3 states that more communities should have the opportunity to own, lease or use buildings and land, which can contribute to their community's well-being and future development. These protocols are fundamental to creating more opportunities for community ownership and management of land in Scotland. As I said earlier, they focus on how present owners of land can create opportunities for local businesses, residents or community organisations through purchases, leases and other collaborative working arrangements. Again, these protocols apply to all types of landowners and communities in Scotland. And again, they set out the reasonable expectations which can encourage facilitating ownership, lease and use of land through a proactive and amicable process. So we know there's different routes for communities to follow to take ownership and management of land on, and these include our legislative routes, such as communities' rights to buy land, community right to buy abandoned, neglected or detrimental land, community right to buy for sustainable development, and our asset transfer process. However, these protocols are very much focused on negotiated transfer, which take place out with any legislative framework, which again is the focus of tomorrow's workshop. So I think everyone that's with us today knows that Scotland has an unusually concentrated pattern of land ownership in an international context. And as we mentioned earlier, the Commission undertook work to support Scottish Ministers' ambition for a fairer and more dynamic framework for the ownership and use of land in Scotland. So a year and a half ago, we undertook a significant investigation into the issues associated with scale and concentration of land ownership. And our research did reveal that this does have a significant impact on communities across rural Scotland. And a common method of addressing monopolies is diversification. And we have made initial recommendations to the Scottish Government to address adverse effects identified. Through our research, we also know that this is not just an issue for rural Scotland, it affects communities in urban too. But actually, there's a lot of things we can do right now, and this is where these protocols come into play in encouraging practice and culture change. So why do we think diversification is important? We know that a wide and diverse availability of land and buildings allows more businesses, organisations, individuals and communities to pursue projects of all scales and purposes. It offers more people the opportunity to own and lease land, which contributes to a fairer Scotland. Access to land can also provide a range of benefits in terms of supporting sustainable local economic development, providing spaces for social and amenity activities, and improving access to green spaces, which we know has been a massive issue through this pandemic. However, we know or we believe that diversifying ownership and tenure can have benefits for owners of land too. It can contribute to a more diversified asset base, it can generate funds to reinvest elsewhere, and it can improve public profile and relationships with the community. But most importantly, it provides opportunities for innovation and collaboration, which don't exist currently. So I don't think I need to say why we think community ownership is important. We all understand that fundamentally, how important community ownership is and what it can provide to Scotland. So I'll go on to now the very specific expectations that we ask through these protocols. So the first batch of expectations, what can communities expect? So these expectations focus on owners of land being proactive in their reviewing and assessing their holdings and buildings. We want to create a culture where land is managed proactively, with landowners shaping and guiding change in a way that delivers mutual benefits and secures our land for future generations, but also in a way that creates opportunities through purchases, leases, and other collaborative working arrangements. So first up, what we outline is that owners and managers of land should take appropriate and proactive action to support good stewardship. And where practicable, this follows consultation with the local community and analysis of the feasible options. So that links back to our protocol on community engagement and communities being involved in decisions about land. We invite landowners to undertake regular reviews of their holdings to assess business needs and consider what opportunities there might be to work with others to make more productive use of land and buildings, which meet the local area's needs and aspirations. So we recommend that this self-assessment is part of regular business planning and review if it is not already. So this ties in a lot hugely with our work on self-assessments and how to build that in terms of practice and mainstreaming it. Areas which should be considered are the land holdings being maintained and used productively in a way that supports sustainable development? Are they being managed in a way that contributes to that organisation's governance and management objectives? But finally, are there opportunities to work with others to make more productive use of these holdings? In terms of productive use, I'll just go backwards again and touch on our wider work looking at this. So we may know, well, we know that the legacy of Scotland's industrial past, that means that almost a third of the Scottish population lives within 500 metres of a derelict site. In deprived communities, that figure increases to 55%. The amount of land on the vacant derelict land register has remained static for years, and the consequences of this for well-being are enormous. So we at the Land Commission have been working very proactively on this, and just very recently our Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force has delivered a series of recommendations to the Scottish Government to influence an approach to tackling the legacy of this vacant and derelict land and ensure that it's no longer acceptable to allow land to fall into long-term disrepair. We've also got a resource kit to support communities and decision makers to bring this land back into productive use. This includes a searchable map of Scotland's long-term derelict urban sites, a toolkit to properly assess the impact of vacant and derelict sites on communities, and a framework to assess the impact of bringing sites back into use that takes into account the wider social, environmental, and community benefits. So moving on to what we can actually do now, these expectations focus on how landowners can manage their land productively and deal with existing vacant and derelict land, but also avoids creating new vacant and derelict land. So as you may know, productive use is not always about development or cultivation. In some circumstances, such as the restoration of natural habitats or long-term landscape regeneration, non-intervention may also be appropriate. So the specific expectations are that owners should develop proactive estate management strategies. Where land is causing demonstrable harm, owners should work with stakeholders to examine options for restoring them to productive use. Owners should take action to ensure that vacant sites and buildings are maintained in reasonable condition, awaiting reuse or redevelopment. Consider interim uses is really important. So there might be long-term plans. However, we ask landowners to consider interim uses, including through leasing, partnership working, or other collaborative working. There's some fantastic ideas and projects out there that do this. So yeah, we think this is a very beneficial use of land that has long-term plans, but is sitting there not used immediately. And finally, landowners should avoid taking steps that lead to any land becoming declared ownerless. So now we move on to creating opportunities. What do our protocols set out in terms of expectations? What can you expect of landowners? So landowners should consider proactive requests for sale or collaborative working for community organisations. They should be open and transparent in their decision-making processes and provide clear reasons back to you as communities about their decisions where this is appropriate. We recommend that landowners take account into wider benefits that can be delivered when making decisions on transferring land or buildings. These benefits could be to the economy, society, environment, and may be long-term benefits which could outweigh the value of short-term gains. If change in ownership is not feasible, there will be circumstances where landowners can't change ownership, can't diversify the ownership. Landowners should consider what the other options are for leasing, partnership working, or other collaborative working arrangements. This is not just about diversity of ownership, although we acknowledge how important community ownership is. Significant benefits can be achieved by diversity of management and use too. So what do we ask landowners to take into account when selling land? They should, firstly, they should consider those with existing pre-exemption rights who should be approached first. They should then considering offering sitting tenants a right of refusal. They should then consider opportunities to work with the community. And finally, when a landowner is considering transfer of land or buildings in a sale that will take place off the open market, they should make the community aware that this is a case where this is possible. When landowners are considered, when this is possible, publicly acknowledging these approaches. So moving on to negotiate transfer, which you're going to look at in much more depth tomorrow. So the expectation is that whether a private landowner or public or other type of landowner or community initiated sale, the procedure set out in the Community Land Scotland and Scottish Land and Estates Protocol for negotiated sales should be followed. So you'll learn more about that tomorrow. Joint valuation processes should be considered with the cost split between both parties. And title conditions and clawbacks, which are sometimes used when land is transferred, particularly if the land is sold at a discount. Landowners should ensure that these title conditions and clawback arrangements are appropriate and proportionate, and should avoid those that will have an adverse impact on the viability or sustainability of the business, community project, or other activities on the land. So finally, looking from this section, we've got a whole range of resources. We've actually created a route map for landowners, which takes these landowners through the process of negotiated transfer and diversification of ownership and tenure. We've got frequently asked questions. We've been through quite a lot of process with our stakeholders to create these protocols and route maps. A lot of questions asked along the way, and a lot of questions asked through our workshops and webinars. So you'll find a lot of helpful information in these frequently asked questions. And finally, as with all our protocols, we've got some fantastic good practice case studies up on our website, so do have a look. So we'll stop there and ask if there's any questions, and I'll hand back to Lindsay.
Thanks, Kirsty. We don't have any questions in the Q&A box, but people can type those in. I just wondered if you feel that there has been a change in how landowners feel about selling to communities. Certainly from a Community Land Scotland perspective, it feels like a lot more landowners are becoming open to that possibility. I was wondering if that was your sense at the Scottish Land Commission as well.
It is our sense. I think there was a really good sign of that at the Scottish Land and Estates conference, where they talked about community ownership. I wasn't at the conference myself, but I was seeing the tweets coming through. So I think culture behaviour is changing. I think there is still some concerns out there that we have to work together with Community Land Scotland on dispersing those concerns. But I think on the whole, there is a genuine acknowledgement that community ownership is a good thing and is a good thing for Scotland. And I think landowners are becoming much more open to that as a normal practice. It's just when you sell land, it's part of the normal practice of selling land, normal thing to take into account of. There's nothing radical about community ownership anymore. It's just part of the normal landscape. And I think we do see signs of that becoming more not acceptable, but normal for landowners to consider. So, but working very hard on that, working very hard with landowners as we move through this, and working with yourselves to just show how transformational community ownership can be. So yeah, there is a shift, a good sense. I don't know, Helen, what do you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we see that in our conversations with landowners and agents, that it's becoming more common, and I think there's a bit of a momentum building up as well, because obviously as land ownership, as community land ownership happens in certain places, then we can all promote that, and we can all provide case studies, and we can all provide examples of that. So it becomes, I think, more expected from communities that they should be given that opportunity. But I think landowners just have it on the horizon more, that as they're reviewing their land holdings, that it's something that they give some consideration to. So yeah, I think it is starting to shift. Yeah.
We have another question from Maria Montanaro. If it's not mandated legally to contribute to register, what likelihood is there of compliance, especially the large housing developers?
Well, it will be legally required to contribute to the land register. I mean, we're not experts in registers of Scotland, but I mean, it will be a legal requirement for land to be registered. But I mean, what the protocols do is provide that framework in the meantime for kind of very simple but effective basic levels of information that can be made available by landowners. So, I mean, again, if that's not already being provided, it gives communities a way in to open that discussion. It gives a framework for asking for that information, but also to come back to us if those requests aren't being reasonably listened to or reasonably met. as well. But yeah, it will be a requirement for land to be registered.
Okay, thanks, Helen. I don't think we've got any more open questions at the moment, so we'll hold on. One has just popped in from Jacob K. Our Community Development Trust is based in the very agricultural region of Dumfries and Galloway. It's a tricky one now. What are your thoughts regarding Brexit and potentially damaging trade deals or lower subsidy for farmers and potentially diversing land towards housing schemes? So I think Jacob's asking, is more agricultural land going to be used for housing in the future?
Helen, I don't know, do you want to say something about the good stewardship expectation that we have in the protocol about primary use? I mean, I don't know if that affects, but
it might do. I mean, it's a difficult one for us to answer because nobody knows exactly what the impacts are going to be, do we? But I mean, what we do know is that things will change, whether it's through Brexit, whether it's through our post-pandemic recovery. Landowners of all types, rural and urban, are going to be taking different views of their land holdings at the moment and looking to see, you know, what's the best use and how those can be used in the future. So I guess there's a couple of things that come to mind, and I'm not going to make a comment about Brexit or what might come from that. But in terms of future land use, the stewardship protocol is relevant, yes, because it looks for landowners to take the greater public benefit into account, as alongside private benefits. But to consider the greater public benefits and to consider the importance of primary uses of land, which might be agricultural use, flood prevention, food production, other uses are set out in the protocol there. The community engagement protocol is particularly important here, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning. If there are going to be large scale or permanent or really significant changes of land use, then communities can expect to be engaged in that and to be involved in at least being informed about what the thinking is about the changes that might need to take place, and to have the opportunity to have an input there and to have their say about what the impact on them as a community is going to be. But the other piece of work that's been happening at the Land Commission is a piece of work that the Scottish Government asked us to take forward for developing advice and about the potential for regional land use partnerships. And I think we're not going to have time to go into those here today, but again, there's information on our website that sets out more about that. Some advice that's been developed with input from lots and lots of different stakeholders that's been put forward to the Scottish Government, which they're now looking at and taking forward, which will help to look at these big structural changes in land and land use and the subsidy processes for different types of land use as well on a regional basis, that will include input from communities in those regions as well. So yes, it is an important issue, not one that we can give a straightforward answer to today, I'm afraid, because the context will be very different in different circumstances. But it is important for you as community organisations to be aware of these as well, and to look for your opportunities to have an input into that and to have a say on how they're going to impact you. So yeah, do have a look for those things coming forward.
Thanks, Helen. We've got a question from Olivia Dewar about lochsides and owners charging to park and use toilets in areas that were formerly public. Is Land Rights and Responsibilities statement relevant to that situation?
potentially, and I think probably get in touch with us so we can look into it in more detail and understand the background. It's, you know, local circumstances, I think it's very hard to say until we know a bit more background, but yeah, potentially. But do get in touch with us and we can look into that.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. That's all the questions, so we can move on to the next section.
Okay, so this is back to me, and this is quite a short bit. It's just really pulling everything together, because what we've been talking to you about for the last hour or so is what you as communities can expect from landowners. But we just want to finish that off by just spending a few minutes drawing out what is in the protocols about what landowners can expect from communities, because there are some reciprocal expectations here as well. So the first is, and these come up in different protocols, and they follow through generally through all the protocols in the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. So what's expected from communities in many ways is not that different to what you might expect from landowners. So the first is that members of the public act responsibly and demonstrate in consideration for the interests of others, care for the environment, and be accountable for their actions. We have seen, in particular over the summer, haven't we, huge pressures put on particular local areas where visitor numbers have increased to unprecedented numbers, and that care and the interest for others hasn't always been demonstrated. So I mean, most of this is common sense and things that you will understand that need to be taken, but it is set out there in the protocols as a reciprocal expectation. The second one, again, as we would expect landowners to make contact information available, we would expect community organisations to have that information available as well, so that if landowners are looking to engage with communities, they know where to come to, they know who to come to, and they know how to get in contact with you, and that other people in the community as well can see the organisations that they can come to represent them or to help them have more of a say in issues. Where community aspirations, when again come back to that last question, that's maybe relevant here, where a community concern or an aspiration about land management emerges, we ask that is communicated promptly to the owner or the manager of that land, that you don't expect them to already know about that's communicated to them in a reasonable manner, and that they do have reasonable opportunity to respond to the issues raised and enter into some constructive dialogue about it. The last two relate to community organisations that have aspirations for buying land or entering into collaborative working arrangements. And again, you'll come back to this in more detail at your workshop tomorrow, I'm sure, but asking that community organisations do share that with the landowner or the agent, that again, the landowner or the agent knows that you have those aspirations, and knows your reasons for it and what you think the potential benefits would be, so you can have that conversation and look for negotiated outcomes rather than having to go through statutory routes wherever possible. And also that the community groups, of course, are formally constituted and working on a democratic basis within their local area, which is good practice, but for some types of funding it's also a requirement. It's necessary that those democratic, the governance and the democratic basis and the constitutions are properly set up so that formal negotiations can begin. So they're the 5 key issues that are the responsibilities for communities, most of which we hope are common sense, but they are set out as reciprocal responsibilities, as well as what you can expect from others. That, I think, brings us to the end of the information that we have to share with you today, but we have some time left. So, I mean, I think we have time. I'll hand back over to Lindsay because we have time left now for just general discussion and any other questions that have come through.
Thanks, Helen. We just had a question about our event tomorrow. So Community Land Scotland has got an event in 3 stages tomorrow. The first one is going to be looking at negotiation from idea to offer, and the next one will be looking from offer to acquisition. So we have speakers from the National Lottery Community Fund and a solicitor talking about learning from kind of previous communities, but what works and doesn't work. And then at the end of the day, we'll be demystifying what happens on day one of ownership, because we know a lot of communities are very busy working their way through a buy it, and then they get to day one and it's, you wake up in the morning and discover that you own land or a building. So you can find out more about that tomorrow. I don't know if there's any more questions anyone would like to ask while we still have Helen and Kirsty here. I can see my colleague has just put the link in for tomorrow's event into the chat box. It looks like we don't have any more questions for you, Kirsty and Helen. You must have answered them all. A couple of people have raised their hands. I think those have possibly been answered, because if people want to come on and talk, you can ask to do that in the Q&A box. I'm assuming those raised hands are questions that have been answered. A thank you from Maria saying that it's been really informative. And I think that might be all in terms of questions and answers. So as I said earlier, we're making this available on Vimeo. So if you think today has been really interesting and you think other people might benefit from viewing it, we'll be making that available to share on our Vimeo. And another excellent from one of our attendees, so that's very positive. So I think we'll just finish off there, and I'd like to say a big thank you to Kirsty, Helen and Callum for speaking today and sharing all their knowledge about land rights and responsibilities. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Yeah, thank you for having us. So do get in touch if you have any particular query or information. Our contact details are here, and wishing you all the best in your land reform journeys.
Thank you. I'm just going to finish up now.